Good evening, everybody, for those of you that are either in Central or Eastern time, and good afternoon, early evening for those of you on the West Coast. As Penny mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about accessibility at Tulane, and I'm going to cover information both for accessibility in terms of classroom, testing, housing, anything that you can think of on the day-to-day access points for the university, but then I'll also give you some information for some of our broader sense of accessibility, because there are two different offices that manage accommodation requests. For the majority of students working with the Goldman Center, we will be your main point of contact, but I just want to let you know that if there's ever a need for us to kind of go outside of Goldman, that there is another office and another team that's going to be involved. But for now, let's go ahead and jump right in. So as the director of the Goldman Center for Student Accessibility, our mission is to eliminate barriers, advocate for inclusion, and ensure access for every member of our community. And we also recognize that a community rich in diversity acknowledges that great minds think differently. So here are the two leaders of accessibility at Tulane. The first is myself, Dario Bayardo, and then Andrea Vassar. She's actually the executive director for campus accessibility and ADA 504 coordinator for the university. So again, the two different offices work together to ensure that those 2 points of accessibility in terms of our mission are met on a daily basis. At the Goldman Center, we provide access to reasonable accommodations, again, in the areas of academics, so classroom, testing, housing, which I know we've been receiving some inquiries for already, and then dining. And the reason that we are providing access to accommodations to these different pockets of the community is because each one of those has a set of different policies and procedures that are involved with them. And so when we talk about accommodations, either under the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended, or Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Fair Housing Act, we are talking about making reasonable modifications to those policies when the reason is due directly to an individual's disability status and what their needs are because of those disabilities. In addition to providing access to accommodations, we also support students with learning to advocate for themselves, because as Penny mentioned, their K-12 experience most likely involved you as their parents handling a lot of these decisions for them, and the conversations, navigating tough situations. So what we try and do with students now that they're at the post-secondary level is give them that introduction to what it means to have to make these requests for themselves and follow the process and engage with everyone who's going to be responsible for providing the accommodations. So the majority of students, when we focus on the academic sense, that's going to mean working with their professors or other people in their academic departments to ensure that they know what their accommodations are, what they mean, how they can best be used to support them. And then if changes need to be made, looping us in at the Goldman Center on maybe some of the limitations that they're experiencing. And then lastly, one of the other major areas of support that we provide is through our learning specialists. So we have disability related learning support, and we have an individual who is responsible for our academic programming. We have a peer mentorship program that we started 2 academic years ago, and that we are growing. And we hope that more students, as they enter, if they are seeking support from each other, but also from those familiar on campus with what it means to have a disability and navigate an academic year from that lens, we do also offer that support. So more information on that will be shared with you all throughout the summer by our learning specialist. All right. And so kind of continuing on to talk about more specifics as to how managing accommodations in the post-secondary setting is going to be different for a large number of our students. I wanted to make sure and clarify where that's coming from. So again, in the K through 12 setting, what you see on the screen here, there are two different laws that govern access to accommodations and supports in K through 12 schools. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that legislation is there to help ensure that every student experiences a level of success in school. And so whether that is through a 504 plan that you may have remember or may have in place right now, an accommodation plan, sometimes is what they're referenced as, or an individualized education plan or an IEP. And so through those mechanisms, it is the school's responsibility to help ensure that no child is left behind. Another law that you may be familiar with, at least in terms of that phrase. The schools are responsible for identifying students who may have additional needs and, either helping them get evaluated or referring them out for evaluation, and making sure that everybody who is, working with that student knows what they need. That changes when we get to the post-secondary level. We operate mostly off of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which the language there changes to where it's no longer about success, but ensuring access. And so, that just that word alone, when we talk to students, it makes sense, when we're interviewing everybody and going through that process of like, what is your disability? How does it limit you? And what ultimately do you need? It makes sense for students to want to say, by having these accommodations, it will ensure my success in this academic program or in housing or in meeting my dietary needs. But what we actually have to focus on is ensuring access to those different points of the university. And so sometimes because of that, it may feel different when it comes to us determining what accommodations we can provide. The students are responsible for letting us know that they are an individual with a disability and engaging with us at the Goldman Center in our process for figuring out what are the possible options for support that exist that, again, can help ensure equal access to the program or the university. Right. And in terms of who we serve, so the majority of students will fall in probably the first or second category of individuals. So students with a known history of accommodation. So again, if you're in this webinar right now, it is likely because your child already has some type of accommodation plan in place or an IEP, and you're looking to continue those services into their time at Tulane. The next group of students are those that have a history of academic struggles, but may not have a formal diagnosis yet, or maybe they had a diagnosis but didn't necessarily need accommodations. We find that a lot of students do realize that because of this new setting, because of the difference in expectations and the amount of independent work that students have to do and manage on their own, sometimes those conditions that kind of went unnoticed do surface up. And so we want to ensure that students in that category also have access to supports through Goldman. And then lastly are the students that when they get here, they may not have had any diagnosis before because the environment in which they were learning, the supports that were available, there wasn't a formal need for that to happen. Maybe sometimes the schools had a learning specialist or a response to intervention program and everything was taken care of by the school and nothing formal needed to happen. But now again, with this major change that the student is experiencing, they then may realize in the fall that they might need additional support and go through the process of figuring that out. We are also here to support those students. And if that means granting some provisional accommodations once we get some minimal amount of information. I know a lot of times students want to maybe work with a clinician back home once they go home for Thanksgiving break or Christmas break. We can figure out some pathway towards supporting a student if they're starting to report experiencing some challenges. Okay. Now for the actual process, in case you have not already seen this on our website or have heard about this information at one of the admitted students events, we did have a table there with this same information. So if it looks familiar, that's why we try and keep it very simple. So for students that are requesting accommodations, step one is to complete an application. That's available on our website, accessibility.tulane.edu. Up at the top toolbar, there's a button that says request accommodations. And then students can navigate to two different pathways. Either I am a Tulane student already and I have a username, I have an email address, or I'm not quite there yet. Maybe, sometimes earlier in the spring, this happens, or for students transferring and interested in figuring out what we can do. But either way, we still get the same information on our end. So it's completing a brief application where your student will self-report what it is that the diagnosis that they have, giving us some information about how it is limiting to them in the academic setting or housing setting or dining, whatever that realm might be, and then what their thoughts are on how they can be supported through accommodations, whether that's through accommodations that they have had in the past and they're looking to continue on, or even if it's new for them and they want to brainstorm some options. There's an open text field that students can use to report what they're requesting. And then the second step, once that application is submitted, your student will get a confirmation message on their screen and an email. It's going to go to the email that they used in the application. So if your student is still using a personal email address, that's what they'll need to check. If they're using their Tulane address, they'll need to make sure to check that one. Because from there, we'll send a link for how your student can submit any documentation that is already available to support their request. At this time, if an application is considered complete, if we have both the form that they fill out and documentation, and that is when someone from our team will contact your student via email to schedule an appointment. And so depending on the time of the year, summer, the wait times can vary. What I had put out in some of the materials for spring for your students is to try and aim to have their application submitted by May the 15th so that we can start scheduling appointments for June and July. And that is simply just to ensure that by the time school starts in August, that anything that we needed to set up is already done. Any questions that we have, the majority of them are answered. And that way it's one less thing to worry about. But I will say there is not a formal deadline because things change over time. So if you have not yet submitted that application, you were not late, you can still do that. When we contact you, there just may not be an appointment available next week because we may have already scheduled those for individuals who applied in May. So that takes us to step 3, which is scheduling a meeting with a member of the Goldman Center staff. So in that meeting, we generally set them up for 30 minutes. They'll be referenced as a welcome meeting, if that also helps to ring any bells in the future. So in that welcome meeting, what we will do is you'll have the opportunity to meet with a member of our team. Parents are welcome to join. However, kind of going back to that self-advocacy piece, we do ask that students lead the meeting as best as they can, knowing that their parent is there to also help support if they need. What we want to do is get a really clear firsthand understanding from your student about what it is that they think are their challenges and what has been successful for them in the past, and what they think, if possible, if we can provide them, what that difference will make. And all of that information that they provide during the interview, plus the documentation that's submitted, that is what we then use to move forward in the process, which is determining possible options for accommodation. And so in some cases during the meeting, we may be able to go over that very quickly because everything is clear. It makes sense in terms of what is being requested and our understanding of what program they're in and what those requirements are. By the end of that 30 minutes, we might be walking you through some next steps on what you're going to need to do come August. For others, we may end that meeting realizing that we might need more information, or maybe parts of the requests that are being made may not either be reasonable or just not available, whether it's too specific or the program is unable to do that because of their requirements. But you will get that information by the close of that meeting on what needs to happen next. So if it is more documentation, we will make sure that that's clear and try and clarify as best as possible what we need. Again, if you haven't gone to our website yet, there is a form that is available on our requesting accommodations page that an evaluator you can send to your evaluators, they can fill it out and they can either give it back to you for submission, they can send it in on your behalf. But that is what we can use in any situation. If you don't know what to provide, if there's not a specific report that's available to submit, we can always try and use that form. We also do offer consultations with evaluators. Sometimes evaluators don't know what they need to give us, or they're not clear on that form. So we are available to talk to them if there are questions that will help them, give us the information that can help us complete a determination. And then lastly, the fifth step is making sure your student switches over to using their Tulane email address, because we will do that in this process. And that is where we will send the final confirmation of our determination. So in some cases, every single accommodation that was requested, if it's deemed reasonable and it makes sense, that is what we can approve. Other situations, we may be able to partially approve accommodations, and we'll give a rationale as to why some of the other ones may not have been helpful, been possible for us to do. And again, going back to that meeting, it's more helpful for us to describe that even during the meeting, just so that when you get the email, it's not a surprise. If the determination is made that we cannot provide what is being requested, there is always an opportunity for the student to either submit additional documentation or to request an appeal. But generally speaking, we will give rationale as to why something may not have been possible, and then kind of go from there. And if there are still questions or concerns, we have a process for that. Okay. Yes. And so to this point here, I know one of the most common questions that I get during the spring and summer from parents of incoming students are, is my paperwork, is it enough, or how long is this going to take? And so a point that I wanted to stress about our process, it is individualized. So for some students, again, based on what's being requested, the information that's shared with us, both in documentation and during the meeting, everything that's provided, we might be able to just move straight through the process. But if there are parts of the request that aren't as clear, we may ask for more information, or if we need to consult with the provider or other disability service professionals, maybe it's just a really unique request, we might need to consult with campus partners, so housing or dining. It really can vary. So we don't have a standard turnaround time for a determination. We do try and process every single request as soon as possible, knowing that information is helpful for the student and for you, for your planning purposes. And so if there is ever any delay, it is likely going to be due to the fact that we might just need more information. And so on that piece, if you do have documentation that you're questioning, I would say submit what you have, and then during the meeting itself, that is when we can spend time kind of going through a little bit more specifics of the information and exactly what it is that's being requested, to figure out if what you're asking for is supported by what we have, or if we might need more information. And then again, in terms of outcome, if parts of an accommodation request are not possible, we will do our best to explain the reason why, and maybe some next steps or alternatives that we can offer. And then again, make a plan to check in throughout the middle of the semester to see how things are going. All right. So on that note, We are having some events during move-in to also help orient students and families to the Goldman Center. So on each move-in day from 1 to 4 p.m., staff of the Goldman Center will be available. We are located in the Howard Tilton Memorial Library, very close to the LBC, where I know another event is going to be taking place to help share resources that are available for students. So we will have an open house style event, which just simply means you can come for as little or as long as you think will be helpful during that time. We will have very general information in terms of next steps available, but then staff will also be there for consultations if you haven't quite started the process and need to get that done, if you need to check in on a pending request, if you want to talk more specifically about an accommodation or your documentation. We will have staff available for brief consultations, think maybe 15 minutes or less. And then also our testing center will be open and available for tours, so that if there are any questions or concerns about whether or not the space is going to work, you can go through that. Our testing staff will be there to walk you through what the process will be for checking in. We do administer a very high volume of exams in the testing center. So, that's something that we want to make sure students know early on how to use our center. So that way, on the day that they come isn't the first time that they've seen us, and they're not, surprised by anything. But on these 3 dates, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of move-in week, we will be available from 1 to 4 p.m. There is going to be an opportunity to RSVP coming your way via email, so be on the lookout for that, and just let us know. It's not mandatory. If you don't RSVP and you show up, we will still be there. It's simply just to get an idea of how many families we can expect, and just to make sure we have enough people on hand and supplies. So be on the lookout for that to come. And then lastly, just some contact information here. Again, our website, accessibility.tulane.edu. You can leave off the HTTPS if that's easier for you to remember. It will still go to the same place. Our email address, goldman@tulane.edu, or our phone number, 504-862-8433. Leave that up for just a second here in case anyone wants to write that down. But again, Penny did also say she is sending this out, so if you happen to miss it, you will have an opportunity to get this again.
Okay, I think it's time for questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now is the time where you can type in your question. And yes, I will be sending that information in a follow-up email to everybody who registered for this webinar, but you can also find it eventually on the families.tulane.edu website and the archive. Tomorrow's family newsletter will also contain this information, so watch for that. If you have not been receiving the family newsletter, you can email me at families@tulane.edu and give me your first name, last name, confirm that your student's in the incoming class of 2027, and I will add you to the contacts for that. So I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so I want to prompt you again. Okay, here's a question. Once accommodations are granted, how do they go into effect?
Great question. So in the summer, what we try and do, knowing that there's a long time for some of our students from when they register to when school starts, in August, right before the semester starts, we will send an email again to students to their Tulane email address with step-by-step instructions for what they will need to do. That process is referred to as activating their accommodations, and that is in the academic sense. So if a student has accommodations in the classroom or for testing, and it's something that their instructor needs to know, students will be prompted to access our system. It's the same system that was used for their application. They'll see a whole new side of this website, and the instructions that we send will walk your students through how to basically click on the classes that they have, that they would like to request their accommodations in, what kinds of accommodations they're going to need. Again, anything that we've approved is going to be eligible. And then they will hit submit. And what that does is emails their professors, letting them know that a student in their class has accommodations. It'll have their name, it'll have what their accommodations are, and then it'll have Goldman's contact information in case they have questions. It will not include any reason as to why your student has accommodations. All of that information is confidential and is not shared with the instructors. Just simply, what do they need for support, some information on how they could potentially provide that, and then our contact information.
So another question is, what is the best way for a student to schedule an appointment with one of your staff at this point?
Great question. So the two options are to either call, and our administrative secretary, Ray, will work with your student to find a time that works for you and someone on our team. If talking by phone isn't possible, I know people are going to be on vacation pretty soon, but also if it's just easier, you can also email your request. And again, Ray will contact your student via email and try and find a time that works for both your student and someone at Goldman to connect.
Okay, the next question is, my son was just retested and we haven't received the new documentation yet. Should he submit his old testing for now and then resubmit when we get the new report?
Yes, I would submit any documentation that you may have. And then again, in your welcome meeting, if the welcome meeting takes place before your new documentation comes in, be sure to let them know that. I think it's clarifying whether or not, there's any expectation for any significant changes. Sometimes it's just a matter of, the testing results in the same outcome. It's just updated. If there's any suspicion that either there's a new diagnosis or things are going to be substantially different, if you want to express that during the meeting, that again will be information that's helpful for our team to figure out what might be a reasonable solution for your student.
The next question is there any assistance available for students to receive a device such as a laptop?
So we have an assistive technology specialist for different forms of technology that can be used to support students, but it does not go as far as granting a student a laptop for rental or for checkout. The library does offer computer checkouts as a form of support. Now, if your student needs to utilize a computer during an exam because of their disability, we have laptops in the testing center that during the exam, we would allow the student to use to make sure that they're getting access to their accommodation, and it is Goldman provided, so that way we can affirm to the professor that it is our computer, it's not theirs. There's not programs on there that they should be accessing during the exam. If it's ours, we can manipulate the internet connectivity. But if it's simply them needing a computer, just in general, I would refer you to check out the library's media services or IT to learn more about that rental process.
Dario, does the Center for Academic Equity have a laptop loaner program of some kind?
I'm not sure, but I can look that up and follow up with you.
Okay. The next question is a really good one. Are accommodations given for all 4 years at Tulane, or does the student need to request accommodations at the start of each term?
So I'll go back to the individualized determination process. In most instances, I'd say the majority of the accommodations that we issue are going to be throughout your student's time at Tulane. The only exception would be if we communicate that something is provisional, temporary, that will be clearly communicated, and it will likely be due to the fact that your student's condition or the limitations that they're experiencing are temporary. So with that said, I cannot say that, yes, I want to leave room for the fact that maybe someone listening may have a student in a situation where something that they request is only necessary for a semester. But in most cases, especially if we're talking about students who have had certain accommodations throughout the K through 12 experience, more than likely we are going to look at that and say, yes, like that makes sense to continue on. And it's not something that we're going to only set for temporary time frames.
So I'm trying to look on the Center for Academic Equity website to see if there's something about laptops, and I'm not finding it right away, but Dario and I will look at that tomorrow, and if we find some information, we will include that in the follow-up email. So I feel like I've seen something like that before, but I might be wrong, and so we just want to be really sure before we mention
Yeah, if I can like add on to the computer question, something that I would encourage your student to do is talk to whomever their advisor is in their program to learn about any courses that might require specific technology or computer requirements, because we do run into this on a regular basis where students in the business school have courses that require Microsoft Excel. So if a student is planning to bring a MacBook but not have the software that's compatible to run Excel in the same format, it can pose some challenges in the computer lab portion of class, because everything that is taught on a PC. So then when a student comes to test with Goldman, because they have extended time, we do not have computers to lend out for those reasons, meaning they need a PC, but they personally have a Mac. We would need to make sure that the student, if everything is going to be done for that class or in their program on a PC, our recommendation is that they buy a PC to avoid running into that problem. So something to check on with your academic advisor or the program advisor to learn about those specifications. A course syllabus should also list what the computer requirements are, because on our end, we simply won't have enough computers in our testing center to provide to those who need a computer because of their disabilities. And then for those students who just simply need a PC instead of a Mac.
Okay, any other questions? We've answered all the ones submitted so far, so I'll make sort of a last call for questions. Now, if you sleep on this information and something occurs to you tomorrow, then I'll just remind you that you have questions about this content, about the accessibility and accommodations content, then email goldman@tulane.edu. If you have general feedback about the webinar, you can type that in now if you would like to submit any comments before we end the webinar, or you can email those to me at families plural, @tulane.edu, and I'll forward that on to my colleagues. Anytime we have a webinar, I'm happy to forward that along. Or if you have questions about other items, then you can always email families@tulane.edu. And I will answer those if I know those answers, but I'll reach out to the appropriate people on campus and connect you with them if it is something that's beyond the scope of what I know. So we just want to thank you all for participating with us this evening. And we appreciate your engagement with us, but also your support of your student. And we're happy to partner with you in that. So I will close the webinar now. I'll thank you, Dario, for all of this wonderful content you provided, and just wish everyone a great evening, and be sure to check your email in the next few days for follow-up information. Good night.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good evening.